We received a complaint on Mark Landry and John Larada, and it was more about their treatment and the way they were dealing with some of our citizens. As we started reviewing the incident, it launched a internal affairs investigation. John Larada had a body-worn camera that he was wearing, and our review revealed the fact that Larada was not utilizing it all the time. He was turning it off, and we started reviewing several instances, and we noticed a pattern of Larada disabling and manipulating his camera. A lot of times with him was Mark Landry, and so on November 4th, we put Landry and Larada on administrative leave. The concern that I had was there appeared that they were taking small amounts of marijuana, where they would be given normal situations. They would have been given a civil citation. They were taking the marijuana and disposing of it, not writing reports. They were not issuing citations. They were not making arrests. When I removed them from the street, we immediately conducted a drug test on them. When, as chief of police, my concern initially was the fact that if they were taking marijuana from someone, what were they doing with it? Were they using it? Were they selling it? Or my biggest concern is whether they were planting it on somebody. We have no reason to believe any of that took place. Their drug test was clean. We've received no complaints of planting narcotics on anyone. It appears it was actually the opposite. They were not documenting, they weren't doing anything. They weren't charging people. It looked like they almost had bigger fish to fry, so to speak, is what they were looking for. The problem with it is those are policy violations. So we have no civil rights violations, we have no legal violations, it's all policy violations. But the problem you have with that is they lost their credibility. Why were they taking things and not documenting it? As our review, especially in these two officers, former officers, because this morning they were terminated, but as these officers were doing things, we started looking into everything, which went to a larger investigation that included 11 officers. The investigation had revealed policy violations, as I said before. 3 officers at 9 a.m. this morning were terminated. It was Mark Landry, John Larada, and Algenis Maceo. The other officers, some of them one received a letter of counseling. The other officers involved received what we call an oral admonishment, which is just, a first form of discipline. And we did have one officer who was completely cleared. So, as we walk through the whole thing, I got to tell you, it was very disturbing to meet with them this morning. I was very angry. To have to stand here before you and explain this is just an embarrassment for me. They have embarrassed our police department. They have placed the community's trust that we have in jeopardy. They have tarnished our brand, and they betrayed the oath that they swore to uphold. I could not be more disappointed. We are a police department that has a tremendous relationship with the community. And I think the election of Mayor Jane Castor is an endorsement of our community's faith that they have in their police department. And they have just totally betrayed that. I will continue to work with the community to restore their trust in us, and we expect to move forward from this. I will be meeting at the various roll calls to explain to the officers of this good department that we have and the hard, good working cops, and I will sit down and I will explain to them the process of what took place and how we are going to move forward and the expectations that we have of Tampa police officers. We will be making some minor policy changes, and we will be moving forward. April 1st, I think, if you're aware of it, we have 60 body-worn cameras at the Tampa Police Department. We have not had the funding to expand the program. April 1st, we did an RFP, a request for a proposal to expand the number of body-worn cameras to the Tampa Police Department. That is still ongoing. That'll take us some time, but we expect the request for a proposal to give us a competitive price on what it's going to take to put every police officer at the city of Tampa with a body-worn camera. Questions?
Can you talk about the length of time this went on and the frequency?
Yeah, it was very extensive review. It took us quite a bit of time, and I was very deliberate in the whole process. I met with 6 of the officers personally to discuss their discipline. I met with them to discuss their situation. Some of them, 3 of them were actually able to explain and walk me through what they did, why they did it. And that was how we came to the conclusion that there were only 3 officers that had the most egregious violations, and that's why they were terminated.
Chief, can you kind of walk me through how the investigation initially into the 2 officers led to the others? I'm not familiar.
Okay, yeah, what happened was someone complained about, it came in, it was about Landry and Lorata and the way they were treating people. Someone stepped forward and gave us a complaint. When we started digging into that, there wasn't body-worn camera footage from that incident. And it led me to believe, well, what do they have to hide? If they had the body-worn camera footage, if they were innocent, would have cleared them of the allegation. It wasn't there. We started digging into it more, and that's how it expanded to other officers. But what would happen was we had basically 2 main officers at a call. Some of the officers would be the third and fourth person there. And traditionally in police work, if you're just a backup and you don't take any legal action, you don't really write a report. It's the originating officers that are expected to document the incident.
Chief, can you talk about what will happen with the cases where these officers that were fired are involved in?
Well, we've had 1 case, as you're aware, that was dropped. We have 5 felony cases with 4 different people that have now been dropped by the state attorney's office. And that's the other thing. I have to apologize to the court now because the judges, the attorneys, the defense attorneys, the prosecutors are now been burdened with reviewing each case. I have been in contact with the state attorney's office. Normally we wait until an investigation is completed, but it was back in February, I believe. It was February 21st, I'm sorry, is when I notified the state attorney's office before the investigation was completed. I notified the state attorney's office when I felt that we had enough credible evidence that these 2 officers could not be trusted in the courtroom. And there's going to be there's cases that are dropped, but I got to tell you, this is what happens when cops do stupid stuff.
So I'm sorry, have you had an issue with disciplinary problems with them before?
The 1 officer, Elgenis Maceo, does have some discipline. We'll be able to give that to you. But what happened was when you look at all 3 of them, the number of violations, they're no longer competent to do their job. And they have truly betrayed the trust that we have placed in them.
Were most of these officers on 1 squad, Chief? Was there a lack of supervision?
Well, we have launched an investigation into the supervisors to find out what they knew or what they should have known. 2 of the officers were on the same squad. I don't know. Some of the others just worked the area, that type of stuff.
Chief, did they ever explain to you why they were just disposing of this drug evidence?
They thought, as we become a more liberal society and small amounts of marijuana are a misdemeanor it's a citation, it's not really an arrestable thing. I think they had a mentality that was bigger fish to fry. Landry was Officer of the Month. These were cops that were making a lot of arrests, and while they're making a lot of arrests because they weren't taking the time to document the small stuff, and because they weren't documenting the small stuff and weren't following our policies, they've lost their credibility to do their job. These are policy violations, and whether it was almost like they felt they had bigger fish to fry. But you know what? That's not the way police work. That's not the way the cops should be operating.
Chief, I'm still trying to get from A to B. I'm
No,
sorry.
look, it's very complicated, which explains why it took so long for us to do this.
Because you got the 2 officers initially. Were the other people who were pulled into this investigation because they were the 3rd or 4th responding officer to different scenes, and that was what?
I apologize. You're right. That's what it is. There were multiple times that we went through and had to review things. And we had Landry and Larada, who were the main players, and then we had Maceo, who eventually, we end up relieving Maceo back in February 8th because we felt like he wasn't completely credible and that he wasn't completely forthright in his testimony with us during internal affairs. And the thing of it is cops are human. I don't expect them to be perfect, but I expect them to have character and I expect them to have integrity. And I feel like this was lacking in these three, and they're not worthy of wearing our badge anymore.
What did they say to you? Did they apologize? Did they say that they were justified? What did they say?
They were apologetic, but I find that most people, when they're looking at losing their job, they tend to be apologetic, but it's too late. They knew what they were doing was wrong. And I don't mean to stand here and preach, but I'm angry with them because they knew what they were doing was wrong and they intentionally did things to deceive everyone, and that's why they've been dismissed.
Can you talk about the body worn cameras? You can tell if somebody turns it off, like you have a record of that. How did you sort of come about finding that?
Well, as we reviewed the footage or tried to review footage that wasn't there, that's what triggered it. And what happens is when the footage isn't there, it makes you think they have something to hide. And I think that's the crux of this whole thing. There's no reason to believe they've done anything illegal, so to speak, but they've lost their credibility. No one has come forward that they've planted narcotics on them. I have to believe had they done that, we would be hearing about it. No one will cooperate. The citizens that they encountered won't cooperate because they were caught with weed and let go. Think about that. If I had weed and the cops come up and someone lets it go, and then the cops come up to you 3 months later, I don't know what you're talking about. I had no weed. So, we don't really have victims per se. These are policy violations, but there's so many of them, and the way they carried themselves, they just don't deserve to be cops anymore.
Chief, let me ask you another tack on this. If you,
one case dropped and 5 count.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I'm sorry, just clarify, you said that there was 1 case dropped and 5 felony charges. Were there 5?
There are 4 different defendants right now, 5 felony charges. Now you'll have to get with the state attorney's office. When I notified the state attorney's office that these people had some credibility issues, that's why we had some court proceedings filed before the investigation was completed. Once I was comfortable knowing that they had credibility charges or credibility issues, I was compelled to notify the state attorney's office. They will do an independent review, as they should, and it should be completely separate from the police department. They will handle each case individually, as they should, and nothing will be handled that's on their part. And I want to make it clear, we have good, honest, hardworking cops at this police department that do it the right way. And I am so disappointed in these 3, but I am very thankful for the good, hardworking cops that we have here. I am thankful for their families that support them, and I could not be more disappointed or embarrassed to stand before you here today.
Those 5, though, have been dropped, correct?
Yes, and there's potential there's going to be more.
Chief, what are the due process rights that these officers have now that they've been terminated?
Now that they're terminated under the collective bargaining agreement, they will have 21 days to go ahead and file a grievance or appeal their firing. That's up to the Police Benevolent Association as to what they do. They've lost their credibility to do their job. I don't see how, when you're dropping charges on people, all because they have credibility issues.
You said this happens a lot, so many times.
With these officers, it happened a lot.
So can you quantify that? How many times, or can you give us a ballpark?
Steve will provide you with the actual number of incidents. It was in the disposition letter, and we'll have to provide that with you. But I was very careful not to paint every officer involved with a broad brush. These 3 officers, their behavior was unacceptable. The rest of them, just kind of get drug into it, really weren't aware of what was going on. You know, you back up a cop and you drive away thinking they're going to do proper documentation, but they didn't know that they weren't writing anything.
Chief, let me ask you about one other thing, because you said attitudes in the public on marijuana are changing. For decades, officers have been going up to teens or others who have alcohol. Hey, you pour out that beer, you walk away, you're going to be okay. Is this the modern equivalent of that, or is this different, do you think?
You know, I think it's the modern equivalent, but the problem is when you have a body-worn camera, and only one of the officers had a body-worn camera, and you're manipulating it to turn it off, it seems like you have something to hide. And there were so many instances that they did this. It's just, you know, and the thing of it is we can't just have weed laying around on the sidewalks. I don't know what they're doing with it, you know, and that was why they were drug tested. And we have policies that they have to follow, and the fact they could have let people go and documented the stops, you know, because it's not only about the marijuana, it's about stopping people, frisking, searching, not documenting those contacts. It's led to so many other problems.
Can you provide us a couple of instances of Larada's body-worn camera footage so we can see what he's been doing now that the investigation is complete and over?
That's something, yeah, you have to get with Steve.
And their interviews with Internal Affairs with Captain Flynn?
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
So I sent out a media